accepting yourself is not the opposite of wanting to change. You accept yourself as you are, and that is, in my opinion, it's the opposite. It's the prerequisite for change.
Hair goes aside from my soul.
Welcome to the Inspired Evolution, and it's a real treat. I've got someone here with me today that's been inspiring my evolution for quite some time now. Thank you so much for being here, Kristina Mand-Lakhiani. Thank you for doing this, sister. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And, it's not the first time, but still that beginning takes me a little bit by surprise. Thanks for the energy.
I'm glad it still keeps you on your toes because you
Yes,
do know that
yes.
it's coming. You've done this a couple of times. For those that are tuning in, do check out, I'll link the previous episodes that we've had. We've had some really deep conversations on self-acceptance, the tools to happiness. Kristina is a wealth of wisdom, as you would expect from someone, I'll just do the honors, that co-founded Mindvalley, a global school that delivers transformational education for all ages. She identifies as a serial entrepreneur, as a speaker, a mother, a philanthropist. She's a woman definitely on her own journey of her own spiritual development and growth. But most affectionately, she is an everyday life philosopher. Sister Bear, thank you so much for being here. Welcome again.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Everyday Life Philosopher. That's, I think, my favorite title.
Yeah, I've tuned into that, and I know that's kind of that seems like Kristina. It's really what you're digging. So, there's so many. It was really intriguing to have you back here today because there's so much ground that we covered last time around self-acceptance, and I was really diving deeper into. I guess there's that. I'm trying to mince my words, but the reality is struggling a little bit with what I listened to a podcast recently between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, and they were talking about this is-ought conundrum, and those are two very philosophical people. But the is-ought conundrum being kind of, what you refer to as, can I accept myself, like acceptance to a level versus still the need to, personal development, self-improvement. There's a desire to change, right? And that sort of rub between acceptance and change, I still find there's that kind of how do I land between these two things? Do I completely accept myself? But if I completely accept myself, some part of the energy feels like there's an inertia to it. There's a stagnation. Do you know what I mean? But then it's like,
Yeah, I get where you're taking it.
yeah. Can you? Yeah.
I would like to ask why do you want to actually put acceptance and evolution or development or growth on the opposite ends of the spectrum?
But don't they feel like that? Yeah, tell me why they're not.
I know but a lot of the things that we take for granted are actually an illusion. In fact, the whole world is an illusion, but I don't want to go into that discussion. The thing is that, let me give you an analogy. Because I like analogies. You see, I have children, one smaller, the other one a little bit bigger, and they have their cutenesses and their flaws occasionally, and things. I accept them as they are. I love them as they are. I don't want to change anything about them. But of course, being by the nature, since they're children, they're going to grow and learn and evolve and become something else. So it's the same with yourself. Accepting yourself is not the opposite of wanting to change. You accept yourself as you are, and that is, in my opinion, it's the opposite. It's the prerequisite for change. Because a lot of the times what we do with growth or with motivating yourself for growth is that we don't accept the current version. So they think that, there's this picture of perfection, this perfect version of me, and that is my goal. And everything which is less than, in the good case scenario, we're aware of that, we're just not happy with that. But most often we close our eyes or dig our head in the sand to ignore the fact that we are not perfect, that we are less than that picture of perfection that we have in our heads. So I think acceptance, self-acceptance, is not the impediment to growth. It's a prerequisite for growth. It's much easier to grow if you're at peace with what you have right now. Back to children, you know, my son, for example, he has Asperger's. It's something which we can't change, and it makes him see the world differently. Would I like to change that? No. So only when I accept him, and before we knew the diagnosis, it was really hard for me because I had an idea in my head how Hayden is supposed to be, how any child is supposed to be. You know, they're supposed to be this,
how
that,
he
and
ought
that.
to be. Yeah. And then there is what he is.
And I was struggling with the fact that I didn't understand him. I didn't understand why he did certain things until we found out that he has this condition, Asperger's, highly functional, so it's very hard to notice. But it makes him see the world in a different way than the rest of us. Once I understood that, you know, I stopped fighting with things which are irrelevant. I started accepting and loving him. It was so much easier to love and accept my child when I knew what was going on with him. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't grow or evolve. He does. He's a super smart kid. But he grows not from dislike of what we have right now, but from acceptance and like full acceptance of what we have.
Yeah. I'm loving that, because what it's really hearkening home to me is this, the prerequisite versus like kind of tipping it on the opposite end of the scale, I think, is a really beautiful way that you've articulated, and it really helps me reconcile it, because oftentimes I find from a place of lack of self-acceptance, or even not even just self-acceptance, but acceptance of our situation in life. You know, it may not be my own behavior, it may just be my situation. You know, and then sometimes we try and create things from wanting. You know, it's like, oh, there's like an empty void in me and I'd like to create something. And as a coach, it's been pretty interesting these days when people say, oh, you know, they're trying to manifest something, let's say, you know, and they're like, I want. And I've started tuning into this. And obviously some of the work Mindvalley has helped me a lot with that is the energy of like the frequency of it's already here. You know, just relax. Tune into the frequency of it's already here. So when I hear people saying, oh yeah, I want, and it's like, that's the frequency you're putting out. Yeah, you're gonna be left wanting. You're gonna want more wanting. So people say want, and all I hear is lack thereof. And to sort of use that as sort of a point to say, yeah, I hear when we're in that place of not accepting our situation or ourselves, and we're trying to create something from that place. Are we getting closer to home from something that, you know, closer to fulfillment, to something that we want to create? Or are we actually leveraging ourselves out even further away from ourselves, if that makes sense? Because I can sort of see that if we were to self-accept and then accept our situations and build something from that place and continue to grow as a prerequisite, step one, you actually create something that's a lot more centered, a lot more aligned to your values, and actually is something that's really meaningful to you. If we don't go through that self-acceptance as a kind of like a prerequisite first step, we're probably kind of out somewhere already, and then we're venturing even further out and off into a different direction. Am I summarizing it clearly? Yeah.
I
I've made it more
think
complicated.
yes. No, I think yes. I would probably like my logic says that depending on whether you accept or not, the fuel for your action and for your achievements will be just very different. And it may take you in a different direction. It may take you to the same direction, but if the fuel is different, the outcome is going to be different. So again, and you started with such a deep philosophical question. It's really hard to just jump into that without certain level of trust. Like if we take that analogy even further, can you accept the world in its imperfection, with its climate problems, with whatever had happened after the COVID, and with the war, for example, in Europe right now? Accept it and still want to change it. And that's a very hard thing to that's a very hard thing to comprehend, because we often don't accept it, and we want to change it out of not accepting. And out of not accepting, the energy, the fuel is very different. It's usually the fuel of anger, of hatred, of being unhappy. If you accept, the fuel may be very different. The fuel may be caring, maybe love or desire to create something beautiful. So the fuel is different. And when the fuel is different, obviously the result is going to be different. And now, again, since I love analogies and since I love to actually compare your relationship with self with our relationship with children, why I do that is because naturally, for most of us normal people, loving children is the easiest thing. It's very natural, and it's the closest we get to unconditional love. So if you have children or childlike figures, let's say a pet that you love or a plant, whatever, with someone that you love unconditionally, you can take this analogy there. But if you look at a child, you have two children. One has parents, very traditional, old-fashioned parents who insist that you have to work hard, you have to work when other kids are playing and sleeping, because achievement goals are super important. It's not participation is not important. Winning is important. We have this kind of parents. We've seen this kind of parents. Their children are incredibly, often very high achieving children, but also very often unhappy and broken and unfulfilled, despite their high achievements. And then there is another analogy of how children grow and evolve. They do things, they look back at mom and like, mom, have you seen what I did? Did you just see me doing this? And the mom, the loving mom would usually say, yeah, cool. I'm here for you. It's this comfort of knowing that your loving figure is always there for you, no matter what you're doing. Are you doing a silly thing? Are you doing a dangerous thing? Is that person there to catch you? And then if you make a mistake, a loving parent usually says that, yes, it's sad, and that's how you could do things, or that's how we can do things in the future, but I still love you no matter what. These children often also grow up to achieve a lot of things, but from a completely different energy. These are the children who are insanely successful very often, very creative, because they have the courage. For a child to grow and develop, they need so much support and unconditional love, knowing that no matter what they do, there is someone who will accept them. And then there is the other type of children who are so scared to fail because they know that if they fail, the figure who is supposed to love them gives them that love conditionally. You do well, you get the love. So are you going to negotiate for your own love for yourself? Are you going to try to give it to yourself unconditionally? And trust me, you will evolve either way.
There's a couple of questions I want to dive.
Yes.
Yeah. If we don't have the patterns and the models, if we haven't had that modeled to us already in our life by, let's say, parents that were aware of being able to establish that sort of pattern of behavior, do we just have to wait till we have children to be able to model that sort of behavior in our own life?
No. That's I don't think we should deny personal growth to people who don't have children.
Yeah.
But I'm just lucky to have experienced that, and it's easy for me to understand. But you also can reflect on your relationship with your parent figure and see what you would have loved to have and how you would have loved to be loved.
Yeah.
That also works, I'm sure. Or you could use a pet or a plant, as I said.
Yeah,
I think every person has someone that they love dearly. It should be quite easy.
Yeah, there's a really.
If you don't, by the way, if you don't have that example, someone that you love very closely to unconditionally, that's a bigger problem to solve than your personal growth and transformation.
I love that, relationships. So you mentioned practical examples, and we went into the realm of children, which I think is a really palpable example, and I really appreciate that. I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts, and this is hard for me to ask, but I'd love to. Usually asking the uncomfortable questions is usually where we find the most gold. The acceptance and change, and as a prerequisite for change, the more we understand. You gave the example of Hayden, which I was really grateful for. But how does someone like yourself, you're an Estonian, you've got roots, you grew up within the Soviet Union. That was a big part of, for those that have tuned into previous episodes, a big part of your personal development journey was something that was inspired you so much because the Soviet Union was a bit more, I don't want to say, a bit less encouraging of entrepreneurial spirits. Let's put it that way.
I love that.
Right?
Not a bit. Entrepreneurship was illegal, and you would end up in jail for that.
Right. And so growing up with that and then learning to sort of shed that, moving to the States, then moving to Malaysia, establishing Mindvalley, going through this journey, kind of seeing what's going on in that part of the world now. There are so many different narratives that are being projected to people, even just, what local media in Russia is telling the locals versus what's being communicated to people outside of the world. And, then there's the Ukrainian narrative, and then potentially, the US not stepping in to support those people. So many different perspectives on all of this. How do we start to, and, I find myself just challenged by just the fact that it's the 21st century and that, thousands upon thousands of people, innocent people, are dying. And it's like, surely we've evolved beyond that. Or maybe I just spend too many people influenced by yourself in the right circles where it just feels like that is something that we're transcending and we're moving away from. But, for someone like yourself, where it does speak to kind of your heritage a little bit, like the places you've come from, you must have a much more palpable, direct relationship with this. And so how do you accept some of those challenging parts of the decisions of people that are just so hard to understand?
Well, yes, for the background, I guess Russia, the way it is today, is somewhat resembling a Soviet Union where I was born and grew up in, although I did see Soviet Union in its last decade, so it was a different time. So I think what's going on right now in Russia is actually more extreme and more akin to what was going on in, after, let's say, during the times of World War II. I agree with you, this should not be happening in 21st century in Europe, but also for us, complacent, happy people in affluent countries, it is a reminder that the world is not a model of what we experience. And I think in America, that that situation or that perception of the world as the backyard of US is even more extreme to some degree, because I've lived in Asia, I've lived in Europe, and I've always found it a little bit amusing that that US sees the whole world through the lens of the events that happen in US, and sometimes the events that happen in US are irrelevant to the rest of the world, and yet, American audience insists that we have to care, and of course we care, but the world is very diverse, and we sometimes forget that. We forget that not everybody lives like we do. Not everybody has our own values. Not everybody, not everybody has the same goals or wants to go in the same direction. And that is exactly what's happening. And I don't want to go into political discussion of what is going on there, because that would be very, like, we would spend a lot of time. But to simplify the situation, that is exactly why the war is going on, because Russia has been cherishing traditional values for a long time. They are actually very often using the word liberal values as an insult. So what we value in the West, in the Western countries, a lot of equalities and unity of the humankind. It's not so black and white in Russia. They actually think that there are more equal people and less equal people, and there are right ways of doing things and wrong ways of doing things, versus Ukraine wanting to go the European way and Russia not taking it. And I know there's this word NATO, which often is creating a lot of emotion, but actually that is irrelevant. It's more a pretext. The truth is that this is a war of values, the values which choose to be stuck in the past, the values which are very conservative, which are very patriarchal, versus a country wanting to live like, let's say, like Europe does, like the rest of Europe does. So how can I accept that philosophically? When you can't change the world, there are two ways to look at the world. You can either look at it philosophically or look at it with humor, and both things work. Of course, humor right now seems a little bit ill-applied, although there are situations where humor is helpful and could be used, and there's such a thing as dark humor. But the past 2 months, it's been mostly philosophically speaking. If you look at things philosophically, it's much easier to accept. Also, I've done a lot of interviews from people from Ukraine, with authors from Ukraine, actually, psychologists, psychotherapists who help to explain things from very simple, scientific processes. Why do people, for example, believe in propaganda, or why do they refuse to accept facts which seem obvious to us? For example, in Russia, a lot of the footage which is received from Ukraine is explained off as fakes and as not real. And why do sane, educated, smart people go for that? How do you change your views? Let's say if your whole world picture shatters, what is the process of going through that? It's not like, we're not robots. It's not like you've got new evidence and then you say like, oh yes, I was wrong. Most people don't behave like that. For most people, giving up a certain belief feels akin to giving up a piece of themselves. Feels like betraying their past, betraying part of their life. So they resist. They resist to accept the fact that they might have been mistaken. And it's a natural process that a lot of us do. And actually, forget the war in Ukraine. When the COVID happened, there was a lot of that, no matter which side you were on, but there was a lot of delusion. There was a lot of denial. And that is exactly what happens. It's the part of the grieving process. You first deny, then you start negotiating for your truth. Then there's anger and rage. Then there's depression. And only after that, the acceptance comes. And to some, it doesn't come. So if you look at it philosophically, if you look at the situation from the point of view of psychological processes, which we understand, which we have described, it is much easier to see people as they are, except one person. One person I can't accept. I mean, I accept his existence, but I'd like him to be tried for his crimes against humanity. And I'm talking about Putin, obviously. But if I look at all the other people, yes, I do think that Russians are responsible for their leader. But I also see them as a collective they are. But if I take them as individual human beings, I can also see them as just human, going through their human experience, going through their human processes. And these processes sometimes take time. And sometimes for some people, they don't take them. They don't take them to clarity, to unity, to love. They take them to maybe depression, to maybe more anger, to even addictions. It's how is it going to be? We don't know. And I feel sorry for everyone. I feel sorry for people who are being brutally and senselessly killed, and I feel sorry for people who actually support that brutality because they're lost.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned in there the process of denial, and then something, and then anger, depression, and then acceptance. Can you map that out for us again? Can you?
I'm not a psychologist by education, so I will probably butcher this process, but I was loosely describing the process of grieving. And if you Google grieving process in psychology, you will get the full description of it. And as far as I understand, this process goes differently for different people. It takes different time. So most of the people, when they experience shocking, extreme stressful situations, they go into shock, and they have the first stage is usually, disassociation from the reality. And then the process starts. For some people, it starts immediately. Other people suffer. So they say that the normal time frame for extreme stress is 1 month. If you are in extreme stress beyond 1 month, you're usually already into the post-traumatic syndrome zone. But since I'm not a professional psychologist, I wouldn't want to start giving you the definitions. There are the grieving process is a cool place to start. Another interesting phenomenon which I really love is the coping strategies, or the coping mechanisms that we apply to events which we don't like. A lot of things, when reality doesn't match our perception of it, we want to protect our emotions, our psyche from that reality. So we come up with very inventive ways to deal with that, and that's called coping strategies or coping mechanisms or defense defense mechanisms. You can Google any of those terms. You'll find a lot of very interesting things that we do naturally without realizing. And so the denial actually was part of that, but it's also in grieving process, there's also a denial. Like, when something happens, and a loved one dies, you can't accept that. So for a while, it seems that it is not real. It has not happened. That's a process of denial. When the pandemic hit, a lot of people, me included, actually, I couldn't accept the fact that it was something this long and this, hard. It took me a while to just breathe out and say, okay, let's go for this marathon. So it happens. It's just a natural thing. The question is, how long are you in this process?
Yeah. Yep. The 5 stages being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I think it's really intriguing because we're talking about, acceptance is a big theme, and then, learning that a prerequisite for change is acceptance. But then recognizing that potentially in a process of grieving or even with coping mechanisms, denial is almost like a prerequisite to acceptance, or like a stepping stone to acceptance. And it's, then you sort of extrapolate that out, denial, acceptance, change, and potentially even just looking in on what are we denying as potentially a room for us to grow in, right? Is that me describing shadow work then? Is that kind of what I'm coming home to?
I actually, of course, I'm aware of shadow work, but I don't study it, so I can't comment on whether shadow work is that. In my book, Becoming Flawsome, I talk about actually figuring out the relationship with yourself, and part of that relationship is the question of honesty. And I think, and it's such an interesting thing, I think I'll probably loosely and not very correctly quote the Cheshire cat from Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. And he says we're all insane here. You wouldn't be here if you wouldn't be insane. That cat says it to Alice. And I think we're all delusional. We are all delusional. And that's an interesting thing. So when I talk about honesty in my book, I start with lying. Because if you understand the anatomy of lying, it's easier to see where you lie to yourself, and it's easier to see what do you have to give up or accept to start being honest with yourself. I think that the path to self-love, self-acceptance, to authenticity is through honesty with yourself. And that's the thing which is super tricky, because we all have good intentions, and we all believe that we are honest with ourselves, but that is not, strictly speaking, true. And if we talk about lying, it is, of course, a slightly sensitive topic. So let's cut off the lying to the world, which is the sensitive part, and talk about lying to ourselves.
Even though the two are very well closely related together, but nevertheless, let's walk in the same space.
Let's cut it off just for the sake of not engaging emotions which are unnecessary.
Yeah.
Although we do lie to the world as well, by the way. Like if you think of civility or the social rules, part of being civil or part of being socially acceptable is actually learning how to lie. You are asked, how are you doing? How do you feel today? It is very few people who would say honestly how they feel.
I'm having a really crap day, and this.
And I'm okay with those people, although I personally also think they're a little bit weird if they go too much into detail. I don't mind people saying honestly that it's not a good day, but going into detail is a little weird. But then a slightly less triggering example: if somebody offers you a food that they cooked, or shows them a piece of art that they created, and you don't like it too much, you don't say it's garbage. You usually come up with something polite, right? It's lying, actually. But as I said, forget the lying to the world. When we talk about lying to ourselves, if you know how our brain works, you will actually be pretty aware that your brain is like a personal matrix, which creates an illusion to keep you content, or a less creepy example is it's like an overbearing parent whose only goal is to keep you safe at all costs. And keeping safe means creating the world, the picture of the world that matches your reality. It's one part of it. Another part of it is, of safety is trying to be liked, because our evolutionary need is to belong to a bigger group, because if we were cast out of the bigger group, we'd die. So our brain creates so many interesting tricks to keep us content, safe, liked, part of the group. And I don't want to go deep into that because it's a long discussion. But even the way our memory works, all those biases that we are, like Google another interesting thing, the biases that we are we suffer from without even realizing.
Yeah, all the different cognitive biases. Yeah.
And if you yes, cognitive biases, and if you study that, you will suddenly realize that the world is a very elaborate picture that you have accepted as reality. Is it really a reality is a second question.
Yeah, I think that's the wisdom of kind of growing up with Indian heritage, and they call the world Maya, and Maya is the illusion of the kind of world. And I love that, the Cheshire Cat, like, are we all we're all insane, so it's like we're all insane here.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think the more important question is, what do you do with that realization? Because I don't want you to think that if everything is a lie, that means that the values are still important, right? Our values, our human rights, if we talk about war, right? It's all still important, that there are objective rules of the game, obviously. But why I'm talking about that is that there is one very important conclusion that I think we should take out of this, is that you may be mistaken. And that's the most important thing. No matter what you do, there is always this one thing: I might be mistaken. So the fact that the world is an illusion, that your brain lies to you, is not to let you off the hook of honesty and values and certain rules of the game. It's just to suggest that you might be mistaken at any point in time. And it's human. And so anybody else could be mistaken, and it still makes them human, except Putin. That guy is crazy.
And there's I may be mistaken. There's an element of, there's a massive element of humility in that, right? Being open to accept that, I may be mistaken, right? And there's that.
That's also freedom. There's freedom in that, because that allows you to actually see at your crumbling world and say, okay, I might have been mistaken. How can I adjust to this new world, to this new reality? What can I do? How can I get the best out of it?
Do you feel like, and this is potentially, I'm asking you to project, but I probably should speak more from my own experience, because I'm sort of going to go into that masculine, feminine sort of bias there. But as men, there's almost this compulsion to need to know things. It's like, I know, like, I've got this. I know, it's like a bit of a masculine, like, we so got this, and even just recognizing, like, this was probably a couple of years ago, just adopting the, I don't know, and just how hard it was to acknowledge that, just not knowing that, like, I may be mistaken, like, I may not know, and just the humility that invoked to sort of not have the answer to something when, especially when you start looking into, like how much men are driven by potentially, needing to find a mate, and then, competency hierarchies and all that sort of stuff, fundamentally needing to understand that, okay, like, it's okay to not know and accept myself in my not knowing, and okay, I may be mistaken, and softening into that. I think it's the humbling piece, like you said, is actually quite freeing. But it's interesting, that dance with freedom, because there's a denial that I could be okay if I didn't know. I remember that quite palpably, until you start, cajoling yourself to, like, let's just see what happens if I just respond with, I don't know, to a few of the questions when I really don't know. And then it's like, oh, actually, I didn't need to come up with an answer. That's great. Like, actually, I don't know anything. And then you're right. Then it starts to become freeing. Yeah.
I think wanting to control, and I have this masculine in me as well. I remember when I went to deliver my first child, my midwife was entertained. She's like, "You've read
was
all the
entertained.
books." You've read all the books about delivery. I'm like, yes, because I don't know what I'm going into. It gives you the sense of, if you know what's going to happen, that you have some kind of control, and that helps you to cope with fear, and it's fine. It's okay. Of course, my delivery didn't go by the books, by the way.
Said you and every other mother don't do it pretty much.
But I wouldn't, I wouldn't. It is definitely humbling, but humbling is such a loaded word, and guys don't like humbling. Women might be okay, but it is humbling, but not just. I think accepting that you might be mistaken is also a doorway to curiosity. Because if you accept that I might be mistaken, children don't know things. And that doesn't stop them from anything. It's because they don't know, they go and explore the world. It's because they don't know, they look for answers. And that's a beautiful thing. Just because you might be mistaken doesn't mean that, oh, nothing makes sense, I shouldn't even try. And it's super humbling. What it means is that if I might be mistaken, that's a motivation for me to keep learning, keep asking questions, keep looking for answers. Because I might be mistaken any moment. And I've been mistaken on things that I believed in 10 years ago. And then I've changed that belief, and then I changed again and again and again. Everything is fluid, and the world changes. And sometimes we're mistaken not because things are wrong, but because they made sense then. We live in this cancel culture, which is so entertaining to me, in a bad way, entertaining, that we cancel things which were created in a different context. We say, oh, that's wrong. Yes, from your perspective, from you in 2022.
Your vantage point.
But was it wrong then? Then maybe it was necessary. I have issues with Stoics today, but I understand that when they wrote thousands of years ago, they made sense. So the thing is that this idea of right and wrong is so, and I know it will sound horrible, but it is fluid, because the world changes, and oftentimes right becomes wrong. Wrong seldom becomes right, although it does. It does. If you think of the past, gay marriages were considered wrong, right? Not dying at war was considered wrong. Choosing peace over war was considered meek, and
foolish.
The world changes.
Yeah. It's sorry, I'm just having this moment where I'm realizing I'm speaking to the everyday philosopher, and then there's context is king, is what I'm hearing. Yeah, you can, that's one of the age-old, pearls of philosophy is context is king. You've always got to put the wisdom into its context from where it's coming from, and applying that. Taking a bit of a shift in journeys, there's a couple of questions that I guess I've always wanted to sort of ask you. And, some of the things and they're probably going to sound a bit cheesy to ask, especially covering some of the depths that we've gone to now, but I think that'd be really useful to tune into. So, you've been, Mindvalley is something that, it's been 18 years, and that's quite some time. That's longer than a minute. Yeah. I guess I wanted to sort of tune in, and I've been invested in your work for quite some time. I know acceptance is a massive piece for you, and so is, the tools to happiness. But what are the 3 biggest lessons that you feel like you've learnt over the course of, and I know this is in life, but what are the 3 big takeaways? If I was because people often sit down and they ask me this question, what's the biggest thing you've learned from the Inspired Evolution? For me, quickly, one of the things is the power of consistency. I've been consistently podcasting for a week and things just grow, and that's the internal work that I've had to do. And secondly, it's our biggest challenges equal our biggest gifts. That's some of the stuff that I just keep learning again and again in all the interviews. Are there some big lessons that you've learned over the last 18 years of Mindvalley?
Well, I could answer the previous question, but if you ask me, are there any big lessons?
Okay, no, sorry, the 3 biggest lessons, not any big lessons. No, that sounds loaded. That sounds loaded.
Dude, I actually learned a lesson from breaking my phone 2 years ago. I learn lessons from everything. That's the idea of everyday
Of
life
course, of
philosophy. Like,
course.
you take
Yeah.
life and you learn from it.
Yeah.
But I can answer this question
Very biggest
seriously, and I can
lessons.
answer the question less seriously. And I'll start with less seriously. I'll
Let's
I'll
do
give
it.
you I'll give you my three most favorite quotes, which I probably refer to the most. One of them is, life is too important to be taken seriously. Oscar Wilde. I love this quote since before I even knew that personal growth was a thing. My second favorite quote is actually completely anonymous. My second and third favorite quotes are anonymous from internet. So one of them says, I'm sorry, it has a bad word, shit doesn't have to make sense. I love it. It really helps in hard moments, especially emotionally complicated situations.
Yeah.
And the third one is a little more serious, and I also learned it from internet. There's no author. It says, happy are those who are on a detour and can still enjoy the scenery. And I think these three quotes can jokingly summarize my philosophy in life.
Yeah, I
And
love that.
it's a spontaneous answer, so maybe if I apply more thought to it, I'll give you something better. But in terms of
Hey,
lessons,
that was great. What do you mean? I love that, especially the last one. It's more about the process and the outcome. But anyway, please continue. Yeah, yeah.
in terms of lessons, then it's more like the skills which I think are super important. I guess number one is awareness. I believe everything starts with an awareness, and if you practice awareness regularly and for a long time, you don't even need willpower or any kind of goals or motivation to grow and evolve, because awareness is like this radar, like a compass or something. It always keeps you alert to what is going on to your life. If you go through life with awareness, you notice when you do wrong things, you notice when you do right things, and then the motivation or willpower become irrelevant, because you draw motivation from seeing and being aware of what is going on. And I think that it is a much stronger fuel than willpower, because willpower, actually research shows that willpower is a resource which
Limited.
ends.
Yeah.
And another, well, that's usually what I start with. Then yeah, I guess it's really hard to distill my life lessons of all those decades into three life lessons. But I'll give you probably this. I think, being honest with yourself, authenticity, the famous word, the popular word, authenticity. I think this is another really great skill. It is not a simple skill. It is actually much more complicated than it sounds. Being yourself is so hard in the beginning, mastering to be yourself. But once you unlock that level in the game changes, because it's so much easier to go through life just being yourself and not trying something else, not trying to be something else. It's like you just are yourself and you do your best self, and that's your best value to the world. And I think that was thing which I'm right now putting it into words, as you asked. And the third one would be actually kindness. That has been the biggest lesson to me. In my book on Becoming Flawsome, which is essentially on the skill of authenticity, I give 3 skills which are important for authenticity. It's courage, honesty, and kindness. And I don't want to go into courage, and we did talk about honesty, but I think honesty has to go hand in hand in kindness, and kindness has to go hand in hand with honesty, because honesty without kindness is mean, and kindness without honesty is meek, it's pleasing. So for me, the third lesson is the discovery of kindness as a quality. We are in a world which is obsessed with so many things, be it love on one spectrum or achievement, hustling on the other side of it. I'm surprised right now that I put them on the opposite sides, but it just came out like this. But kindness is the thing which is undervalued on all levels. It's undervalued as actually substitute to love, where loving is hard. For example, right now when the war is going on in Ukraine, of course it's hard to love your enemy, but you can still treat them with kindness and humanity, right? Even if they don't deserve it. You can treat with kindness anyone, even yourself. And I also believe that kindness is an important skill for high achievement and success. If you can be kind on yourself and on your mistakes, you will actually have the courage to go out and do crazy shit.
Yeah, I remember there's a small cafe here in Melbourne that I was sitting in, and this sister, older sister of mine, friend, she just, I remember, I'll never forget the way she said this. You know, a friend, like, she was talking to my wife at the time, and we were leaving, and her parting salutation was, "And be kind to yourself." And I remember it wasn't so much what she said, it was also the way she said it. You know, it was like I could see he was someone that had actually worked on that as a body of work, sort of offering that as with the wisdom that it had in it. And it was like, you know, and just remember, be kind to yourself, guys. And it was just like, oh my God. And just the way she said it has left such a lasting impression. And I think it gives you the opportunity to do crazy shit in the world. I think it's a really beautiful ode back to that, because like, if you've got that, again, you know, I think a lot of what you mentioned about acceptance and parenting as well, it's giving you that bedrock from like, I've got this, I'm stable, I'm supported, I'm loved, no matter what. Affording that to yourself with kindness is probably like a really great gateway to start, you know. I think that's brilliant. I love those 3 big lessons. Thank you so much. It was like that I asked. Yeah, awareness, authenticity, and kindness. And within authenticity, we've got courage, honesty, and kindness. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I will put a link to for people to grab your book. That'd be awesome in the show notes as well. On the same sort of trajectory, you've been a mother for a minute, and you've been very open about your journey with Hayden and all of that. 3 tips for parenting. There is so much that Mindvalley has dedicated itself towards, especially the work of Dr. Shafali. There's been so much with the there's Little Humans, that whole aspect of Mindvalley as well. There's been so much that you guys have done for not just personal development for the individual, but, you know, actually stepping out and going, you know what, a big part of us as individuals is our parenting journey. And recently, having become a parent, he's 8 months now. It's flying, by the way, as you know. 3 biggest lessons for parenting that you would offer up in this space.
So I don't consider myself an expert in parenting, but I do think that I have spectacularly amazing kids, and I'm so proud of them. I was doing an interview with someone a while ago, and it was a lady. She asked me, what's my biggest achievement? And to my huge surprise, and I've done so much in the world, I actually said my children. And then I was like, I said it, and I was like, I'm actually surprised I'm saying this, but I truly believe that well, of course, it's too early to say, but I am pleased with the way they are. But my lessons, I guess, since you're still in the early stages, you know, parenting evolves as the children grow, obviously. But since you're in the early stages, the most relevant lesson right now is ask for help. Always ask for help, because it can be overwhelming, and you know, say no to perfectionism. It's not important. I of course, I can't be serious about things. I always have to joke, but. When I did, I remember when my kids were super small yet, I remember I did this training with emergency room doctor.
Yeah.
She did training for new parents, and she said, you know, when we get calls and kids have like babies have broken bones, we actually immediately assume violence, because children are pliable. And she said this funny phrase. She said, babies' bones are made of rubber. So for me, that has been a very helpful thing. And you might be shocked if I say that, but I have this joking saying with my kids. I tell them, kids, remember, you're supposed to get to 18 with all your paired limbs still paired, and all your organs
still intact
and alive. But also, kids made of rubber. So I like to just lighten it up. You know, kids will have scratches both physically and emotionally, and that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. So ask for help. Don't be perfectionist with kids. They're surprising creatures. They actually care much more about how you feel for them than what kind of life you create around them. It comes back to self-love. Think of that stereotype: a child in a very privileged family that has everything, nannies, cooks, beautiful mansion and whatnot, but lacks the love of parents because parents are too busy making money.
That
It's a
is so
stereotype.
powerful, man. I great want to know how
My
you
mom
feel.
used to work in an orphanage, and in Europe, orphanage means kids from very unfortunate families. Usually in Europe, kids end up in orphanage if their parents are either addicted or in jail or killed. And she said, her biggest surprise was, she said, I can't understand. These kids love their parents no matter how crazy they are. And she said, I just can't understand. And that's the thing. And that brings me to the last lesson, though. Love alone is not enough to raise a child. It is important. Unconditional love is super important, but you really need skills, and we don't get the skills. My go-to person has always been Shelley Levko. I love this woman. She's a psychotherapist, and she actually specializes in child-parent relationship. Every time I have a serious problem, we usually turn to her for help, and she's helped me a lot, giving me practical answers, what kind of words to use. And I've learned a lot from her in terms of parenting. And sometimes if she's not available, I just Google. Like, my kid was addicted to iPad, and I Googled, and I discovered there is so much about that. When my first kid was born, I didn't know, should I go bilingual? Should we speak one language? I Googled. There's so much information on that. Ask for professional help, always. Love alone is not enough to raise a happy child. Or not happy, actually, don't raise happy children.
Yeah, but I get what you're saying.
Have connection with you.
Yeah. Wow, I'm so glad I asked that. That was really powerful as well. Ask for help, give permission to ask for help. And the big takeaway for me is, like, it's not about the life that you're creating for them, it's how you feel for them and that connection, that relationship that you do share. And then also the ode to actually the skills. And we've had Shelley on the podcast before talking about limiting beliefs and how to transcend them. So that was a really powerful conversation as well. So thank you for that. And just I love the permission to just be open to support and being okay with that. Permission for acceptance to meet ourselves where we're at as well. And I really appreciate that. On this sort of 3 biggest lessons learned train that I'm on now, it seems like I can't get off. You've been through quite the journey recently as well. It's been probably about 3 years now, but 3 years, maybe a bit longer. But also with the conscious uncoupling that we went through for Mindvalley. Relationships, 3 biggest lessons in relationships in that space for yourself as well, potentially, because I know it's given a lot of people in the Mindvalley ecosystem permission to sort of see where they're best honored for themselves, and sort of, given them permission to sort of find their own cadence and rhythm in life as well. And I think, I've been curious to sort of just learn what are the 3 biggest lessons that you've learned sort of building a family together, but then also consciously taking space to sort of honor yourself in your own direction in that. Yeah.
So if I said I'm not an expert in parenting, but at least I did pretty good with children, I feel even less of an expert in relationship. For several reasons, and it might be a little too private to go into that. And
of course.
I wouldn't mind if we had the whole, a whole episode dedicated to that, and we could go in depth. But I don't want to touch upon things without giving
lightly. The context is key. Context is key.
Especially that Vishen is a public figure and he's known, so I feel a little more restricted in expressing myself in the field of relationships. We actually have understanding with Vishen, but there is a lot of judgment in the society.
Mainstream, I imagine.
Good,
but I think
good and bad judgment. So that's why I very seldom comment on relationships, and I don't expose my own relationships for that particular reason, because I just value Vishen's piece. But I do not know if I'll come with 3 lessons, but I'll try. The first thing that came to my mind was, the moment when we let each other free and decided that we are going to separate, I had a huge sense of freedom in the idea that Vishen doesn't owe me anything. Before it was, but you're my husband, you should. And but you are my husband, but you are my partner, and that's why I expect certain things. That expectation has actually given a lot of pain and poison to our relationship. So what I noticed in the very beginning, in the very early stages of our separation, was that giving up or letting go or accepting that he doesn't owe me anything, that he's a free human being, that improved a lot of things in our relationship. So many things became easier and stopped bugging me. And now that I am going into other relationships, not as serious, but let's say I create new relationships, I carry this lesson with me. This non-demanding,
expectation-oriented,
I don't want expectations. I have no issues with expectations, by the way, contrary to popular belief, because expectations are not natural. But when I talk about demanding certain treatment, demanding certain behavior, and yes, it doesn't mean I don't have boundaries. It's just that if you are not naturally inclined to treat me in the way, and I can tell you how I like to be treated, but if it's something which comes to you through struggle, through
challenge
yourself, then maybe that's not the right relationship. I do not believe. Another thing which I learned, and it's so funny, it's my mantra on a daily basis. I don't believe that relationships have to be hard work. Yes, it is. It requires consciousness. It requires awareness. It requires learning. It requires curiosity. It requires evolution. But I refuse to apply hard work to relationships. It is not a hard work for me to love my children. Yes, I sometimes have questions. I'm sometimes puzzled. I sometimes go and ask those questions and look for help. But it is not hard work. And I don't want my love relationship to be hard work. So my mantra is relationships are easy. Love is easy. It's simple. I'll quote my favorite philosopher, my friend Veena, my dear darling friend Veena. But I'll quote her, not how she says it. I'll replace life with love. Love is simple and deep, but we make it shallow and complicated. I think it's simple. And I'm looking for love which is simple
and deep, and yet we make it shallow and complicated. Wow, I love that.
And I think I will come up with a third one. I had it, but I forgot it. Maybe it wasn't necessary then.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it is. It is. It is necessary because it came back to me. So we talk about conscious uncoupling, and we do talk about that openly. But I want people to understand that it is not so simple and easy. And there are a lot of emotions. And I have had painful emotions after the separation. I actually call it separation because that's what it is. It is a divorce. And yes, we followed the process of conscious uncoupling, but I had my disappointments, my unexpected emotions, things which I didn't know I would feel after we had divorced. It is not as simple. I have resentment. I have regrets, and I can't speak for Vishen because I do not know. But I want people to understand that even if your intention is to end it properly, is to end, let's say, the sex and wife and husband part properly, and continue with friendship, with partnership, with parenting. Even if your intention is good, it doesn't mean that you will not be messy and human and occasionally mistaken and occasionally wrong. It is all there. It's just that we don't talk about that. And on the surface, what people see is that we are still co-parenting. We are still friends, we're still partners in business, and we are friends, and it is all true. It is all true. But I want you to understand that there is a lot of emotion, there is pain, there is disappointment, there is regret behind the surface. It is all there. And it is all human, and it is all okay.
Thank you for bringing it back to that. Thank you so much for sharing so openly and so vulnerably. I really appreciate that. Last time I had you on, I'm still on this three biggest train. And I will get off after this question, I promise. You left me with, ironically or not so ironically, The Idiot. And this. Thank you so much for this. And I still have
Did you finish it?
No, I'm still I'm still only about where is this mark? Oh, between a third and halfway through. It's still character development. It's character development a long way through the story, yeah? Like
that's how life works.
Touche. I've also got a margarita from when we talked. But there was also, I guess top 3 fiction books, because I'm really started to appreciate. I think last we spoke, the drop-in was around, you know what, like you learn a lot from non-fiction, but you learn a lot from fiction as well, and that was a massive drop-in. And since then, I recently read, because they turned June into a movie, the Frank Herbert series from the 60s. And I've been reading that recently, and whoa, it was like an ode to behavioral psychology in fiction. It was like, it's an amazing, and I was like, oh my God, Kristina, thank you.
Lord of the Rings is like a wealth of personal growth ideas and quotes.
Yeah. So what are your top 3? Is Lord of the Rings one of them? What are your top 3 sort of?
I can't give top 3 because it's fiction is for the soul as well as for the mind, and it depends on the mood. So if we talk in terms of personal growth, I do think Idiot and Dostoevsky in general is great, but he requires skill. You have to get through this thick, dense layer of poetry and descriptions and things which you don't get. But he's a brilliant philosopher and psychologist, if you can say so, not by education. So I love Idiot because and I love actually, God, I don't know how they translate them into English, but I think Karamazov's Brothers.
By the way, it's not actually her favorite book. She just has to say that because she recommended it to me because it appropriately fit me as the idiot.
No, it's one of my favorite books.
No, I'm kidding.
It is one of my favorite books, by the way.
Because when you recommended it, I was like, wait, why is she recommending this to me? Am I the idiot? No,
from personal growth perspective. From personal growth perspective, I would say that actually, Lord of the Rings is really good. Yeah. It has such a deep description of hero's journey with all its ups and downs, and it's applicable in so many ways.
But the books, right? The books, not just like the movies are great, but that's what I found.
The movie is beautifully done, but the book, of course.
It's very different, isn't it? Because I even just with June recently, because I read the book because I wanted to watch the movie, and I saw a critically acclaimed movie. I wanted to watch it, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to read the book first because, again, Harry Potter, I love the books. The movies, they're great, but they're like there's nothing on the books, and I know that sounds so cheesy, but there was all this like, I haven't read the Lord of the Rings books, but watching the movies, I love the movies. But with June, there was like such a dimension left out, like it was like watching 10% of the book, there was so much substrate that the book had in there that you were just like, this is beautiful for the eyes, and I see cinematically it's something really special, but it's man, the book's the book. So Lord of the Rings, the books you're talking about?
I have to make a disclaimer. If you read this kind of books, we tend to read them for the story, and the stories are, of course, very exciting. And if you really want to draw lessons from that, you have to read them with that eye. Like, is it applicable to real life? Or like what can I learn from that journey? And we often don't look at that. And actually, there are a lot of lessons. So if we talk about personal growth, I am tempted to say Master and Margarita.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, again, and all three are my favorite books, by the way, but not just these. So these are from the point of view of personal growth, but of course, being the everyday life philosopher, I can draw lessons from anything.
Yeah,
I take this bizarre object, and I'm quite sure if I play long enough of that, I'll come up with something. But maybe with maybe shit doesn't have to make sense. But that aside, I love I love Jane Austen. I have to say a word for her. I love Jane Austen, and
Yeah.
she's smart as well. Don't draw too many lessons from her because she lived in the 19th century, and she's a little too proper. I've read too much of her, so I'm a little too reserved and proper for contemporary people.
Yeah.
And I love Lewis Carroll. Oh my God, he's a mathematician. Read Alice. Read. It's so entertaining, and it's also you'll learn a lot. Not just mathematics and science, but just the approach to life. To look at it differently. I love his curious, ridiculous things, like when she falls through the hole for such a long time, and then they if you read Alice in Wonderland, try to get a book with footnotes, because the explanations to what is going on are crazy fun. Like, apparently she falls so long through the whole rabbit hole that she was supposed to hit the center of the earth or whatnot. I don't remember exactly the because I read it a long time ago.
Yeah.
But just the explanation of from the point of view of physics, how ridiculous that fall was, and how it's a cool book. And there are a lot of cool books. Like, fiction is full of the new ones. My little obsession. I had a little obsession with Sally Rooney. She's a young novelist, and I love her style of writing. She's super smart. Actually, from the point of view of understanding relationships, the girl is a genius. Her most famous book is Normal People, but she has two other books which I also swallowed. And she writes about relationships. It has sex in it. She's a contemporary writer, but God, this woman is sharp. She highlights all the stupid stuff we do in relationships. It's crazy. And it's in the form of fiction. And also, she's a philosophical type of person, so I love to read her random ramblings of the world. And she's a communist, though, which is funny.
Okay. Yeah.
Being an Irish person. So there is a lot of beautiful fiction out there. Just discover it. It's so worth it.
I really appreciate you know,
You're wasting your time. By the way, my holiday reading is Agatha Christie. She was writing not just crime stories, which are entertaining, but she has an interesting like piece. It was written under Lost in the Spring. It's called Lost in the Spring. It's not crime. And it has one of the deepest personal growth lessons in this book. Can your transformation be undone? The whole book is dedicated to a woman going through a very painful transformation. It's about self-discovery. It's about denial and lying to yourself. And the woman goes through this whole process. She comes to the truth. And it ends with a very excruciating question: can she actually turn the wheels back? Would you have expected that from Agatha Christie?
No, it's just crime.
I'm telling you, it's so beautiful world out there.
Yeah, beautiful. I'll check that out. Just before I let you go, one of the interesting things that I've got rattling around, just precipitating for me, is your love for fiction and novels and books, and potentially, obviously looking at Mindvalley at what it is today, and, kudos once again. I love what it stands for, in many ways. And one of the things is it's like a publishing house for authors and their courses and personal development content. Is that somewhat stemmed from your interests and passions a little bit? Like, is that a bit serendipitous, or is that just the natural direction that it took, and it just sort of happens that this is part of your explorations? Because I know you were part of developing the customer journey for quite some time there as well. So, yeah.
Well, I would say that I want people to understand that Mindvalley is Vishen's creation. So sorry for an ugly analogy, but sometimes there are children who have a mom and a dad, and sometimes there are children who biologically kind of had a dad, but it's the mom. So Vishen is the mom of Mindvalley. I have been sporadically part of its journey. I am a creative person. I'm a writer right now more than anything. So I've stepped back from day-to-day running of Mindvalley. I am part of Mindvalley. I still earn a salary there, but I do think it's a creation. So Vishen's passion, Vishen's life, Vishen's values are in the heart of Mindvalley, but it is also the creation of the whole community of the people who are customers of our authors. So it's a co-creation. It's bigger than one person. It's bigger than just one mission. So I take a very humble place in Mindvalley. I'm like that daddy who was there biologically, but you don't know where the daddy now is. I have my own journey. It's part of Mindvalley, but I don't take credit for a lot of things that Mindvalley is. And my passion for books and for fiction particularly comes from the school. I went to a school which had a very, it was secondary school actually, not even university, where we had literature in 3 languages. So we studied English, American and British literature in English, Estonian in Estonian, Russian in Russian, and we had so many lessons of literature per week that it's insane.
Sounds like it,
and that I guess explains why I went into fiction. It just happened. So it wasn't a choice, a conscious choice. I went to a school like that, and they took a turn into that direction somewhere through the school, and I just went along with that. And actually ended up in Mindvalley the same way. I married Vishen, and he was into personal growth, and he started a company, and I had nothing else to do because I was unemployed, and I'm like, my life took a turn there. So I've been following the river. But yes, my passion for fiction is my personal quirk.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, Kristina, it is always such a pleasure to drop in with you, and just, thank you so much for your insights. Every time I drop in with you, I'm reminded again and again and again that the more peace that I afford myself, the more at peace I am with myself, the more peace, I will be with the world. This frequency of acceptance that you just carry so tightly. I really, really appreciate and honor that in you. And thank you so much for sharing that with us as well. And thanks for going down the rabbit hole of some of the more interesting, nuanced sort of questions today, in terms of, especially with, your heritage, and just, how difficult it can be to accept some of the global challenges that we have in the world at the moment. Man, just you always being your open, authentic, vulnerable self. Thank you so much for this conversation today. Really, really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, and it was a pleasure as usual.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment, and if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.